If someone told you that your entire life would change with just one prayer, would you believe them? What if I told you that one prayer could break the chains of your past, rewrite your future, and bring you face to face with the living God? That's exactly what happened to Saul. One moment he was a man consumed with rage, hunting down Christians, convinced he was serving God. The next moment, blinded, broken, and completely helpless before the one he had been rejecting. And what was the first thing he did after encountering Jesus? He prayed. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. Think about that. The first evidence that Saul had truly changed wasn't just his blindness, his trembling, or even his silence. It was his prayer. A man who had spent his life rejecting Christ suddenly found himself crying out to him, because true transformation always leads to prayer. Spurgeon once said, "Prayer is the autograph of the Holy Spirit upon the renewed heart." If you want to know if someone has truly been changed by God, don't just look at their words, look at their prayers. Yet so many people today claim to know God but never speak to Him. They go to church, they read Christian books, they listen to sermons, but their prayer life is non-existent. How can you have a relationship with someone you never talk to? That's why prayer isn't just an activity, it's evidence. It's proof that the heart has been awakened to God. A prayerless Christian is a powerless Christian, and a prayerless life is a lifeless faith. Saul's first real prayer was a cry from a humbled heart. What about yours? Do you pray out of habit or because you truly hunger for God? Do you pray only when you need something or because you can't go a day without talking to Him? Because the truth is, the strength of your faith is directly tied to the strength of your prayers. If prayer isn't your first instinct, if it isn't the foundation of your walk with God, then maybe, just maybe, you haven't truly encountered Him yet. Prayer is the heartbeat of faith. It's not just something we do, it's evidence of who we are. And that's why Saul's first act after encountering Christ wasn't preaching, debating, or doing good works. It was falling to his knees in prayer. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. This wasn't the ritualistic prayer of a Pharisee. This wasn't the cold, memorized words of a religious man trying to impress others. This was the desperate cry of a broken soul, finally seeing the truth. Saul had spent his entire life thinking he was serving God, but in one moment he realized that everything he had believed was wrong, and his only response was prayer. Spurgeon once said, "He who has never wept in prayer has never truly prayed." Real prayer isn't just words, it's surrender. It's the outpouring of a heart that has been undone by the presence of God. And yet, how many people today say they follow Christ but never truly pray? They treat prayer as a last resort instead of a first response. They run to social media, to friends, to distractions, but not to God. How can a soul that claims to know God have nothing to say to Him? Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. Jeremiah 33 verse 3. Saul's life changed because he met Jesus, but the proof of that change wasn't just in what he said, it was in the fact that he prayed. And that should make every one of us stop and ask, what does my prayer life say about me? Because prayer is more than just a habit, it's the foundation of a real relationship with God. It's not about fancy words, long speeches, or perfect theology. It's about a heart that longs to be near Him. So if prayer isn't a daily part of your life, what does that say about your faith? If you never feel the need to pray, if you can go days, weeks, or even months without talking to God, have you really encountered Him at all? Because Saul, the persecutor, became Paul, the preacher. But before he wrote letters, before he preached sermons, before he planted churches, he prayed. And maybe, just maybe, that's where every true journey of faith begins. True prayer doesn't start with the lips, it starts with the heart. It's not about repeating religious words, it's about a soul reaching for God, desperate for His presence. That's why Saul's first real prayer was proof of his transformation. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. Before that moment, Saul had prayed plenty of times. He was a Pharisee, trained in religious rituals. He knew how to recite prayers, how to look holy, how to impress others with his devotion. But he had never truly prayed before, not like this. Because this time, Saul wasn't praying to impress. He was praying because he had nothing left. His pride, his power, his certainty, all of it had been stripped away. He had been blinded, humbled, brought face to face with the truth he had been running from. And when there was nothing left to hold on to, he finally turned to God in real prayer. Spurgeon once said, "Prayer is the breath of the newborn soul." If there is no prayer, there is no life. Because real faith isn't proven by words, church attendance, or good deeds. It's proven by a heart that runs to God. The Lord is nigh unto all them that call upon him, to all that call upon him in truth. Psalm 145 verse 18. That's the key, calling upon him in truth. Not empty words, not memorized phrases, but a heart that has been broken and rebuilt by God. So many people today claim to be Christians, yet their prayer life is dead. They only pray when they need something. They only turn to God when things fall apart. But that's not a relationship, that's convenience. And a faith that only prays when it's desperate is not a faith that truly knows God. Saul's prayer was different. It wasn't a request for success, comfort, or blessing. It was a surrender. A cry from a man who had finally seen who Jesus really was and who knew that nothing else mattered anymore. So ask yourself, when was the last time you prayed like that? When was the last time you truly laid your heart before God, not just to ask for something, but to surrender everything? Because real prayer isn't just something you do, it's a sign of who you are. And if your life lacks prayer, it may be because your heart has never truly been changed. A prayerless life is a powerless life. A Christian who does not pray is like a soldier without a weapon, a traveler without a map, a starving man refusing to eat. And yet, so many people wonder why their faith feels weak, why their hearts feel distant from God, why they struggle to stand firm. Saul had been strong in the world's eyes. He had power, influence, knowledge. But when he met Jesus, he realized that none of it mattered. The first thing he did after encountering Christ wasn't preaching, arguing, or proving his worth. He prayed. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. Spurgeon once said, "I would rather teach one man to pray than 10 men to preach." Because preaching may move people, but prayer moves heaven. And a man who prays is more dangerous to the kingdom of darkness than 1,000 who do not. That's why the enemy's greatest strategy isn't stopping people from going to church. It's stopping them from praying. He knows that as long as they stay busy, distracted, and comfortable, they won't tap into the power of God. The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. James 5 verse 16. Yet how many believers treat prayer as optional? How many only pray when life falls apart? How many live spiritually exhausted because they refuse to go to the source of strength? Imagine if Saul had ignored prayer after his encounter with Christ. Imagine if he had gone back to his old ways, trying to figure everything out on his own. Would he have become Paul, the great apostle? Would he have written letters that changed the course of history? No, because without prayer there is no power. Without prayer there is no transformation. So what about you? Is your life built on prayer, or is it built on your own strength? Do you truly seek God daily, or do you only run to Him when you have no other options? Because real faith doesn't just pray in times of trouble, it prays in times of victory. Real faith doesn't just pray when it needs something, it prays because it needs God. And the strength of your walk with Christ is directly tied to the depth of your prayers. So the question isn't, do you believe in prayer? The real question is, do you actually pray? A life without prayer is a life without power. A faith that does not pray is a faith that will eventually collapse. That's why Saul's first response after meeting Jesus was not to make excuses, not to run, not to argue. He prayed. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. This was the moment everything changed. Because true conversion always leads to communion with God. The man who once breathed threats against Christians was now on his knees before Christ. The one who once relied on his own strength was now completely dependent on God. Spurgeon once said, "Prayer is the true test of a man's spiritual condition. Not church attendance, not good deeds, not religious knowledge, but prayer, because you can fake everything else, but you cannot fake a real prayer life. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you." James 4 verse 8. That's the promise. God is near to those who truly seek him. But the problem is most people don't seek him. They seek blessings, they seek comfort, they seek solutions, but they don't seek him. And that's why their faith feels empty, because they have built their relationship with God on receiving instead of knowing. But Saul didn't just pray for blessings. He prayed because his soul had been awakened. He had finally seen the truth, and he could no longer live without the presence of God. His prayers were not just words, they were evidence that he had truly changed. The question is, can the same be said about you? Do you pray because you want something from God? Or do you pray because you cannot imagine life without him? Because the reality is, a prayerless life is a lifeless faith. And if prayer is not a part of your daily walk, then it may be time to ask yourself, have I truly encountered God, or am I just going through the motions? There is no such thing as a strong Christian with a weak prayer life. A prayerless believer is like a warrior without armor, standing defenseless in the battle of life. And yet, so many people claim to follow Christ but never speak to him. Saul's transformation wasn't just seen in his actions, it was heard in his prayers. A man who once spoke against Jesus was now crying out to him. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. Spurgeon once said, "To be a Christian without prayer is no more possible than to be alive without breathing." If prayer is the breath of the soul, then a Christian who does not pray is suffocating, starving, spiritually weak. But what happens when a person truly prays? What happens when a believer builds their life on constant communion with God? Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. Matthew 7 verse 7. Faith grows, strength increases. Battles are won. Because prayer isn't just talking to God, it's standing in his presence. And when you are in his presence, everything changes. That's why the enemy wants to keep you away from prayer. He doesn't care if you go to church, as long as you don't pray. He doesn't care if you call yourself a Christian, as long as you don't actually seek God. Because Satan knows that the moment you begin to pray, truly pray, you become a threat to him. So ask yourself, do you pray because you love God or just because you need something? Do you truly seek his presence, or do you only come to him in desperation? Because Saul didn't just pray to get out of trouble. He prayed because he had met the living God. And once you encounter him, once you truly know him, prayer is no longer a duty. It becomes your greatest desire. A prayerless life is a powerless life. A Christian who does not pray is like a lamp without oil, meant to shine but unable to give light. And yet, so many people wonder why their faith feels weak, why their hearts feel empty, why they struggle to stand firm. Saul didn't just encounter Jesus. He responded in the only way a changed man can. He prayed. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. This wasn't a one-time event. Saul didn't just pray in that moment of crisis and then return to his old ways. Prayer became the foundation of his life. The man who once relied on his own wisdom, his own power, his own ability, now depended entirely on God. Spurgeon once said, "Prayer is not a hard duty but a privilege and a joy." But the problem is, most people don't see it that way. For them, prayer is a burden. It's something they feel obligated to do, not something they desire. And that's why their faith feels distant, because you cannot love God and never desire to speak with him. Rejoice evermore. Pray without ceasing. In everything give thanks. 1 Thessalonians 5 verses 16 through 18. Paul once Saul wrote these words, because he knew the secret to unshakable faith, prayer without ceasing. He had learned that prayer isn't just for emergencies, it's for every moment of life. Yet, how many Christians today only pray when they are desperate? How many treat God like a backup plan instead of their first response? Saul was a religious man before his conversion. He knew how to pray the way the Pharisees did, with rehearsed words, empty rituals, and no real connection. But this time, it was different. This was real. And that's the difference between those who truly know God and those who only know about Him. So what about you? Is prayer something you do out of habit, or is it the lifeline of your faith? Because the truth is, if you don't pray, you don't truly depend on God. And if you don't depend on Him, then who or what are you depending on? At the end of the day, your prayer life reveals the truth about your faith. It's not about how much you know, how often you go to church, or how good you appear to others. It's about whether you truly seek God. Saul had power, knowledge, and status, but the moment he met Jesus, none of that mattered anymore. He wasn't concerned with what people thought, with his reputation, or with holding onto control. He humbled himself and prayed. Behold, he prayeth. Acts 9 verse 11. That's the real test, isn't it? Not what you say, not what you claim to believe, but whether your life is marked by prayer. Spurgeon once said, "The true measure of a man is not what he does before men, but what he does before God in secret." Think about that. Who are you when no one is watching? Do you pray when no one tells you to? Do you seek God when there's nothing urgent, no crisis, no desperation, simply because you desire Him? Because real faith doesn't just cry out in trouble, it prays in every season. In joy, in sorrow, in confusion, in thanksgiving. Because to the one who truly knows God, prayer is not an obligation, it's life itself. Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. Jeremiah 33 verse 3. That's the promise. God is not distant, He is not silent, He is waiting. But He doesn't force Himself into our lives, He calls us to seek Him, to know Him, to pray. So here's the final question. What does your prayer life say about your faith? Are you like Saul before his encounter, full of knowledge but far from God? Or are you like Saul after he met Jesus, on your knees, surrendered, transformed? Because in the end, the greatest evidence of a changed heart is this: a life that cannot exist without prayer.